All right, let's unpack this. Usually when we sit down to talk about history, especially the really heavy stuff, the really dark chapters of human history like the transatlantic slave trade, we have a tendency to look at the numbers.
Statistics. Yeah.
Exactly. We look at the ledgers, we look at the dots on a map moving from one continent to another. We look at mortality rates as percentages. And I was thinking about this while reading the source material for today. It's almost like a defense mechanism, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
It's a way to keep the horror at arm's length.
Yeah.
I mean, if you turn a tragedy into a math problem, it becomes abstract.
Right.
We talk about 12 million displaced people, or the economic impact on the British Empire, or the death rates during the Middle Passage. And don't get me wrong, those things are incredibly important. They provide the framework,
But they can also act as a veil.
a veil that hides the actual human beings.
Yeah.
Precisely. Statistics have a way of, flattening the specific individual human experience. And that is particularly true when we are talking about groups that history has systematically minimized or silenced.
And that is exactly where we are going today.
Mhm.
We are going way beyond the statistics today. We are focusing on a story that is, well, it's often completely omitted from the standard history textbooks. And honestly, it's omitted not just because it's painful, though it is incredibly painful, but because it deals with a specific kind of violence that polite history just likes to gloss over.
We are talking about the unique, systematic experience of African women on British slave ships.
And to do that, we aren't just going to talk in generalities. We have a specific narrative here. We have a source that reconstructs the journey of a specific ship, the Henrietta Marie. And through that vessel, we are introduced to a woman named Amara.
And Amara is going to be our anchor. She's our guide. Through her eyes, we're going to see things that the logbooks usually hide.
So I really want to set the scene here because the source material is incredibly visceral. We aren't starting on the ship. We are starting on a beach. It's 1697, so this is the late 17th century. We're on the coast of West Africa. And the central figure, Amara, is 23 years old. And the detail from the source that it stuck with me, I couldn't get it out of my head, was the smell.
It's the smell of the branding station.
The source describes the smell of burning flesh and iron still warm from the fire. Just imagine that for a second. The sensory overload of that terror.
It is the moment of branding. And we need to pause here and really understand what this moment signifies. It's a pivotal moment of transformation, the most horrific sense imaginable. You have this woman, Amara. Before this moment on the beach, who was she?
She wasn't a number. She was a weaver.
Right. She was a weaver in the kingdom of Dahomey, a skilled artisan. She was a wife. She was a mother of 2 children, and she was carrying a third. She had a place in a complex society.
Yeah.
She had a name. She had a life.
And then, in a matter of seconds, that identity is physically seared away from her. The source describes the letters RAC for the Royal African Company being burned onto her chest, right above the left breast.
It's a brutal bureaucratic stamp. It's a corporate logo.
That's exactly what it is. It's a logo.
And it marks the transition from person to property.
Yeah.
Those 3 letters, RAC, signify that she no longer belongs to herself. She no longer belongs to her husband or her children or the kingdom of Dahomey. She belongs to British traders and shareholders sitting in London.
And there's this detail right after the branding that I found so humanizing in the middle of all this horror. The source notes that while she's standing there, wrists bound, in absolute agony, she starts counting.
She's counting the other women.
It's a habit from her trade, right, as a weaver.
Exactly. A weaver spends her life counting threads, counting patterns, looking for symmetry, creating order. And in this moment of total chaos and trauma, her brain defaults to the one thing she knows how to order.
She counts.
She counts. She counts 47 women.
That counting habit. It's this small shred of her old life, just holding on. It's a resistance of the mind right from the very start. But she's standing there watching this ship, the Henrietta Marie, and the source describes it looking like a floating prison. And then comes the inspection. And I have to say, this part made my skin crawl. This is where we meet Captain James Morrison.
Captain Morrison is a crucial character to understand here. He isn't some cartoon villain, twisting a mustache. He represents the cold, calculated authority of the trade.
The business of it all.
Exactly. He's not acting out of passion. He's acting out of business. He's inspecting the merchandise.
He inspects Amara, and the translator confirms what Morrison already suspects. She is pregnant. She's about 4 or 5 months along. Now, you'd think Maybe, just maybe, in a different world, that would pause the process. You'd think there might be some hesitation to put a pregnant woman on a hell ship.
But Morrison's reaction is the complete opposite. It's chilling.
He basically just does the math in his head.
He does the math. He realizes she is 2 pieces of property for the price of 1.
God.
That's real.
God.
It's a value add. The child, if it survives the journey, is born into slavery. It's pure profit calculation. It's an investment. So Amara is loaded onto the boats. And this brings us to the core mission of this deep dive. We have these accounts, logs, transcripts, historical reconstructions that reveal what happened once that ship left the harbor.
And this is the part that usually gets left out of the history books. We know about the chains. We know about the disease. We know about the Middle Passage generally. But our source explicitly states we are going to explore the unspeakable things British slave traders did to African women every single night at sea.
And it is a dual narrative we're looking at today. On one hand, it is the story of profound, systematic sexual violence, what the logs euphemistically called customary liberties. We'll definitely get to that phrase in a moment.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, and this is so vital, it is a hidden story of resilience. It's about how these women formed survival networks in the middle of hell.
So let's get on board the Henrietta Marie. Amara is separated from her previous life completely. Her other children were torn away days ago. Now she's with these 47 other women ranging from, 18 to 40 years old. They are hauled onto the deck like sacks of grain.
And immediately, we see the gender divide in how the ship is architected. This is a really important logistical point that explains everything that follows. The ship wasn't designed simply to hold people. It was designed to segregate them in a very specific and very deliberate way.
Right. Describe the difference for us, because usually we picture the slave ship as just everyone packed into one big, dark hold.
For the men, that was largely true. There were over 300 men on this ship. They were packed below decks in the hold, chained in total darkness, suffocating heat. They were packed spoon fashion, so tight they literally couldn't move. They lay in their own waste. The death rates down there were catastrophic. It was a dungeon.
But the women were kept differently.
Yes. The women were kept on deck, or in areas near what they called the barricade, areas that were easily accessible to the crew. They weren't usually shackled in the same heavy way the men were.
And there was an official reason for this, right? I'm assuming it wasn't out of kindness or any sort of chivalry.
No, never kindness. It was economics. Captains had discovered through decades of this brutal trade that fresh air improved survival rates for women.
It kept the product alive.
Exactly. And remember, women were valuable cargo, especially for their reproductive potential, like we saw with Amara. So keeping them out of the suffocating hold protected the investment.
So the official line is, we keep them on deck to keep them alive.
Correct. It looks better on the ledger at the end of the voyage.
But the source we're using today argues there was a massive unofficial reality to this whole arrangement.
Precisely. And the reality is one word: accessibility. By keeping the women on deck, or in these unlocked quarters, the captain was making a strategic choice to provide the crew with sexual access. You have to understand the ship as a self-contained world.
Right, let's talk about that environment. Because once that ship leaves the coast of Africa, it's gone.
Once that anchor is raised, moral boundaries are suspended. The laws of England do not apply out here. The captain's word is absolute law. The cargo has no recourse. There are no police, no judges, no witnesses other than the perpetrators themselves. It is a complete vacuum of accountability.
It creates an environment of total impunity. And this leads us directly into what the source calls the system of customary liberties. I think we need to talk about that phrase, customary liberties. He sounds so bureaucratic. It sounds like a clause in a contract.
It's incredibly sanitized.
Yeah.
And that's intentional. You find this kind of phrasing in historical logs and insurance documents from the time. Things like made available to the crew or used according to usual practice.
Wow.
These euphemisms were used to document systematic rape without ever using the word.
It's language designed to protect the conscience, isn't it? Or at least to pretend there is one.
It allowed the shipping companies and the insurance agents back in London to process the paperwork without confronting the reality of the violence. I mean, if you write mass rape in a logbook, that's a disruption. That's a problem. But if you write customary liberties, it sounds like a perk of the job.
Like an extra ration of rum.
Exactly. Like an extra ration of rum. That is sickening.
It is. But it was the reality. So let's walk through the nightly ritual on the Henrietta Marie. The source paints a very vivid picture of the shift in atmosphere. The sun goes down and everything changes.
The day crew finishes their work. The night watch begins. Rum is distributed, which is a really volatile element here. Alcohol and absolute power are a dangerous, dangerous mix. And then the selection process begins. Sailors would emerge from the hatches and just walk among the women who were chained or barricaded on deck.
The source mentions Amara watching this happen. It describes the sailors emerging with this casual confidence, like they were entitled to it, they knew they had permission, they weren't sneaking around.
They did. They were entitled to it. And it wasn't just a free-for-all. There was a hierarchy of exploitation that mirrored the ship's chain of command.
Right, let's break that down. Who got first pick?
The officers. Captain Morrison, the first mate, the doctor. They would claim the most desirable women, off the younger ones, the teenagers, as their exclusive personal property for the voyage.
So they would take them off the deck.
Yes. These women were kept in the cabins, separated from the group on deck. They were essentially sex slaves for specific officers for the duration of the entire trip. They were isolated, which was its own form of terror.
And then you had the common crew.
The remaining women, about 30 of them, including Amara, were left on deck for the common sailors to rotate through. And this is where the source gets very specific about the types of violence. It wasn't uniform. And understanding that variation is key to understanding the terror of it all.
Yeah, the descriptions of the sailors, there's the red-haired sailor. He stands out in the narrative as particularly brutal.
He represents the sadistic element. The source says he preferred women who resisted. It tells us about a woman named Aflua. On the very first night, the red-haired sailor selects her. She fights back. She scratches. She kicks. She resists.
And he didn't back down.
No. He brutalized her for it. He enjoyed the struggle that was part of the liberty for him. He wanted to break her spirit.
And then, in contrast, you had what the source calls the quiet sailors.
Right. The ones who wanted quick, uncomplicated transactions. They looked for compliance. They just wanted to use a body and leave. And this creates a psychological terror for the women, doesn't it? The unpredictability.
You're just sitting there in the dark. You hear footsteps.
Exactly. And you don't know who is coming for you tonight. Is it the man who just wants to get it over with? Or is it the man who wants to hurt you? That unpredictability is a key component of the trauma. It keeps the nervous system in a state of constant, high-alert shock.
Well, it's horrifying that Amara wasn't selected immediately. There's a reason for that.
The source suggests her pregnancy might have offered a temporary exemption. Some sailors might have been superstitious about touching a pregnant woman, or perhaps it was just chance. But she witnessed everything. She heard the sounds. She saw Afua being dragged away and then returned, completely broken.
Let's talk about Afua, because her reaction really sets up the next section of our discussion, which is about the psychology of survival. After that first night, after the red-haired sailor, Afua goes silent.
She goes catatonic.
Mm-hmm.
For 3 days, she doesn't speak. She eats mechanically if food is put in her mouth, but she's not there. This is a profound trauma response. She has retreated deep inside herself to a place where they can't reach her.
But then on the fourth day, something shifts.
She breaks the silence, and she asks a question that changes the entire dynamic on the deck. She asks the group, how do we survive this?
And this is where we meet Nika. I love this figure in the story. Nika is an older widow. She's a survivor of a previous raid. She seems to be the center of this new women's network.
Nika is the voice of pragmatic wisdom. She is the matriarch of this makeshift community. She realizes immediately that she cannot teach these women how to stop the sailors. The power imbalance is too absolute. They have weapons. The women have chains. Fighting back physically is suicide.
So what does she teach them, if not how to stop it?
She teaches them how to manage the damage. She shifts the focus from prevention, which is impossible, to mitigation.
What kind of tactical advice does she give? Because it gets really specific in the source. This isn't just philosophy.
No, it's incredibly specific, which shows you this was learned experience. This wasn't her first time seeing this kind of violence. First, she talks about timing. She identified that the most dangerous time of night was early evening.
Why early evening?
Because the sailors were sober enough to act, but drunk enough to be violent. They had just finished their shift, they'd had their rum, and they were aggressive. Later in the night, they were often too intoxicated to be a threat. They would just pass out. So the immediate goal was to avoid selection during that early window.
So it's a game of hide and seek where the stakes are your life. And she talked about positioning, right? Where you slept on the deck actually mattered.
A huge factor. She advised them to try to hide near the bow, where the spray from the ocean made it wet and cold, or near the equipment hatches where access was awkward and the footing was bad.
Basically, make yourself the least convenient option available.
Exactly. If a sailor is stumbling around in the dark looking for an easy target, he's likely to pass over the woman who is shivering in a wet puddle or wedged behind a crate. It's grim, isn't it? Trying to make yourself cold and miserable just to avoid assault.
It's survival of the most inconspicuous. And she also taught them about hygiene.
Using salt water to clean wounds. It sounds so basic. But in those conditions, filth, human waste, sweat infection was a death sentence. Neka taught them that staying clean as much as was humanly possible was an act of survival.
But the most powerful advice Neka gave wasn't physical, it was mental. She talked about going elsewhere.
This is the concept of dissociation. We have psychological terms for this now, but Neka understood it intuitively. She tells them, and this is a crucial quote from the source, "What they do to your body cannot be prevented, but what happens in your mind that you can control."
Wow.
She is teaching them to split their consciousness, to preserve a core self that the slavers could not touch.
And we see Amara apply this directly. The source describes the night her exemption ends. A sailor comes for her in the second week. It's unavoidable. And she doesn't resist physically.
No, because she's learned from Afu's experience that physical resistance might provoke even more violence. Instead, she uses her weaver's mind. She retreats. She visualizes the cloth. She counts the threads. She thinks about the specific dyes, the indigo, the red ochre.
She's building an entire world in her head.
She is. She thinks of her mother's advice from when she was a little girl. The strongest people are not those who never suffer, but those who suffer and continue anyway.
It's incredible. She is mentally back into Homie, weaving a complex pattern, while this horrific violation is happening to her body on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic.
It allows her to endure the unendurable. By engaging her mind in a complex, familiar task, counting the warp and the weft of the fabric, she creates a barrier. It's a profound testament to the resilience of the human mind. The body is captive, but the mind refuses to be.
And it wasn't just individual survival. This is what really struck me about the source material. We often think of these captives as isolated, especially because they came from different villages, probably spoke different languages. But the source emphasizes that they built a community in hell.
They did. This is the network as resistance. Despite the language barriers, despite the constant fear, they formed a tight-knit web. Nika was the hub, the center of it, but it extended to everyone.
How did that manifest practically? I mean, they couldn't exactly hold meetings or organize in a traditional way.
In small, crucial acts, sharing their inadequate food rations. If one woman got a slightly larger piece of yam, she'd break it and pass it along. Translating for one another. If someone didn't understand a sailor's order, another woman would whisper the translation so she wouldn't be beaten.
And comforting each other. There's a moment where a woman named Chiamaka holds Amara's hand in silence after an assault.
Just holding a hand, just that simple human touch. It's an act that acknowledges, I see you. I am here with you. It counters the dehumanization of the slavers. The slavers say, you are cargo. The hand squeeze says, you are a person.
The source mentions that ship doctors and even the insurance reports actually noted this phenomenon. They saw that women in social groups survived longer.
They noted the data, but they didn't understand the mechanism. They treated it like a biological curiosity. Oh, the females survived better when grouped. But it wasn't biology. It was social technology. It was active resistance. They were literally keeping each other alive.
And there is no better example of this resistance than the crisis with the flux. Dysentery hits the ship in the 5th week, and Chiamaka, the neighbor Amara knew, falls deathly ill.
The flux was a major killer on these ships. It dehydrates you so rapidly. And the sailors, operating on their cold economic logic, make a decision. They look at Chiamaka, see she's dying, and decide to just throw her overboard.
While she's still alive?
Yes. The quote is, no point wasting food. Why feed a piece of cargo that is going to die anyway? Cut your losses.
This is the moment Amara steps up. And it is so bold, she physically puts herself between the sailors and Chiamaka.
It's a moment of immense courage.
Yeah.
Remember, she is property. She has no rights. She's pregnant. But she stands up. She speaks broken English, a language she has only just begun to learn on this voyage. She says, she will live. I will make her live.
That gives me chills. I will make her live.
It's a declaration of power in a place where she has none.
And the sailors, they actually take the bet. They don't just shove her aside.
They do. The source suggests it was a wager to them. A bit of dark entertainment, perhaps. Or maybe they were just stunned by the sheer defiance coming from a pregnant woman. They give her 3 days. If Chiamaka improves, she stays. If not, she goes over the side.
So the network mobilizes. This is collective care in action. What did they do?
They did everything they could with what little they had. Neka provided traditional medical knowledge, herbal remedies she remembered from her village, things to soothe the stomach. Other women sacrificed their own water rations.
And water was gold on that ship.
It was life. Giving up your water ration meant risking your own death from dehydration. But they did it to keep Chiamaka hydrated. They sang to her, they prayed, they kept her conscious, they kept her tethered to the world of the living.
And it worked.
It worked. On the second day, her fever broke. On the third day, she was able to sit up. When the sailors came back to check on their bed, they were genuinely surprised. One of them just said, "The cargo recovered."
The cargo?
Still, they couldn't see it as a human victory. They couldn't comprehend what had happened. But for the women, it wasn't about cargo. It was about saving a sister.
Saving one life in a system designed to grind up millions. I mean, that feels like a massive, massive victory.
It is a monumental act of defiance in a system designed to strip you of every last shred of agency. Claiming the power to save a life is revolutionary. It proves the system hasn't won. Not completely.
So, after 47 days, they finally arrive. The Henrietta Marie reaches Jamaica.
And the mathematics of loss are just staggering. 14 of the women died during the voyage. From disease, from suicide. About 70 of the men died below decks. That's nearly a 30% death rate for the entire human cargo.
That is horrific.
And to the Royal African Company, that was acceptable loss. That was just the cost of doing business. As long as 70% of the cargo arrives, the voyage is considered profitable.
Before they disembark, there's this poignant scene. The last night on the ship, Nika gathers the women one last time.
She knows they're about to be separated forever. The auction block is waiting. They will be sold to different plantations, maybe even different islands. So she gives them their marching orders for the next phase of their lives. She tells them, build networks like the one we built here.
It's a directive, a survival strategy.
She tells them that if they find themselves isolated, if they're alone on a sugar plantation, they must remember their survival on the ship as proof of their strength. She essentially says, we have already survived the end of the world. We can survive this next part.
We survive by surviving. It's a powerful legacy to pass on. And Amara has this realization that she has survived. And not just her unborn child has survived the branding, the assault, the starvation, the flux.
It defies medical probability, honestly. The level of physical and psychological stress she endured, it's a miracle. But she survived.
So let's talk about what happened next. Life in Jamaica. Amara is sold to a sugar plantation.
And again, her pregnancy is noted on the bill of sale as a value add. It increases her price. She gives birth 3 months later to a daughter. And the name she chooses for her daughter is so beautiful. Adawara.
What does that mean?
It means daughter of all. It's a
Oh.
tribute to the collective network. That child wasn't just Amara's. She belonged to Neka, to Chiamaka, to Afua, to all the women who shared their water and their strength. She was a product of their collective will to survive. Without that network, that baby would not have been born.
We actually have some details on the fates of the others, too, which is rare. Chiamaka, the woman they saved from the ocean.
She reportedly survived to old age near Montego Bay. That effort on the ship, that collective action, gave her decades of life she never would have had. Neka was sold into domestic slavery in Kingston. And true to her word, she continued building support networks there. She became a central figure in the enslaved community in Kingston.
And Amara lived another 37 years. She had 2 more children, and she passed down those survival strategies. It's amazing to think about that lineage, that thread of resilience continuing.
It is. But as we close this out, I think we have to pivot to the physical evidence, or rather, the stark lack thereof. Because this story is so rich, but the physical record is so empty.
Right. In 1972, the wreck of the Henrietta Marie was found off Key West, Florida. It sank in 1697 on its return journey to England.
It had dropped off the slaves in Jamaica and was heading back with sugar and cotton when it was hit by a storm.
Right. So archaeologists go down, and what do they find? They find shackles, hundreds of them. They find the ship's bell. They find trade goods, pewter, glass beads.
They find the hard evidence of the trade, the metal, the wood, the things that last.
Yeah.
But what is missing is the evidence of the women's experience. The wreck contains no physical trace of the sexual violence.
There's no artifact for it.
Exactly. There is no artifact you can hold up in a museum that says systematic rape happened here. There's no artifact for the mental trauma. There is no artifact for the dissociation or the network building.
It's the archaeology of silence.
That's the perfect term for it. This history has to rely on documents, on testimony, and on reconstruction. If you only look at the physical remains, the shackles and the cannonballs, you miss the specific gendered horror of the Middle Passage. You miss Amara and Nika and Chiaka entirely.
There is a monument there now, underwater, a concrete marker placed in 1993.
It honors the courage, pain, and suffering of the enslaved people. And it's a solemn, important tribute. But even that inscription doesn't explicitly mention the women's specific experience. That remains a story we have to actively choose to tell. It doesn't tell itself from the artifacts.
And that brings us to the big takeaway here. Why does this all matter? Why do we need to know about the customary liberties and the fresh air policies?
Because the British Empire's wealth, the sugar that sweetened their tea, the cotton that ran their mills, the capital that built the city of London, was built on this. It wasn't just built on labor in the abstract. It was built on the specific biological and psychological exploitation of women like Amara. It was built on their bodies in a way that was distinct from the men.
It adds a whole other layer of understanding to the true cost of that history.
It does. And yet, when looking at Amara, we shouldn't just see a victim. I think that is the trap we can fall into.
No, she was a strategist.
Exactly, a strategist, a survivor, a woman who, in the face of absolute powerlessness, found a way to assert her humanity. She wove a survival plan out of nothing but her own mind and the women standing next to her. She ensured the continuation of her line.
It really changes how you look at history. It's not just lines in a ledger or dots on a map. It's Amara weaving in her mind to survive the night.
Precisely.
So I want to leave you with a thought today. We talked about how these women survived by refusing to accept the label of cargo. They insisted on being people. So here's the question. If their survival depended on that refusal, how does our current understanding of history change when we finally stop looking at the statistics and start looking at the people?
That's the question.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. It was a hefty one, but a very important one.
Very important.
We'll see you next time.